G'day folks and welcome to Footy Rants. I'm Benny Matthews. We're previewing week 2 of the Rugby League World Cup. But before we enter into any of the games leading into this weekend, I just wanted to sort of address the agreements that have been made by the Rugby League Players Association and the NRL around the salary cap and player wages. So just before we've seen the press conference detailing some of the major, or I guess, key points of the improvements. We've seen a few months ago that it looked like the RLPA was going to reject the proposal of an increase of the salary cap to $9.4 million. That has since obviously been knocked on the head, and they have agreed to terms on that. So that is one of the things we can now confirm. It was being tossed up whether it was going to be between sort of 9.4, 9.6, 9.8 million. So the agreed terms are 9.4 million. So some teams, it is suspected that they may be sitting a little bit over that at the moment, but I don't think any of that comes into play until players are on the field as of 2018. So the plot thickens for all this Cooper Cronk, Mitchell Pearce business with that 9.4 million being locked into place. There is room for that to increase to 10 million by 2022. So a bit of a 5-year plan across the board here. That will also see an increase of player wages by 52% over a 5-year period. That's on average. The top 30, so they've increased those squad sizes now to 30 players. The average wage of that is $330,000. That still sits about $60,000 below the average of players in the AFL. So when you're thinking about a competition that is, not too dissimilar to the NRL, largely propagated by teams that are based in one city, whilst you do have a couple in Adelaide and Perth, much like we do, a few teams in Queensland, a team in Victoria, and a team in New Zealand. I still feel like we're a little bit behind the 8 ball as far as, especially when you're comparing that to a game on a world stage. We are well and truly in front of the AFL, yet our players, who are the best in the world, well, we'll soon find out whether we are the best in the world over the next coming weeks, aren't getting paid up to scratch. So it is good to see an improvement. So that average comes up to 330,000. The minimum wage is 100,000, with that set to increase to 120,000 by 2022. So that is, of course, as long as that salary cap increases. So they're the major points that have sort of come out of that. Todd Greenberg sort of danced around a few questions and basically said, of course there were negotiations to be made in the process. I think process was a word that got used about 1,000 times. But as far as the game's moving forward, I guess as long as the game is heading in the right direction, I don't think it's appropriate. I guess it's hard to say the game as a whole, but then you look at struggling clubs, like your Newcastles and whatnot, who are struggling for cash flow. How can you say the game is strong when you've got teams that are getting bought out and whatnot? The Gold Coast Titans with all their debacles, and so it really does lead to interesting conversations as far as speculation on more micro levels with respect to individual clubs versus the macro being the NRL and the sport in general. And that goes outside of the NRL. I'm talking about, grassroots football, how we're looking to develop the next crop of stars. And I'm really interested to see how, I guess, the pooling of young talent is now managed. The NYC has finally come to an end. Me personally, even having sort of coached in that area, I'm happy to see it go. I think we can now strengthen everything from a state league perspective. It's always going to be hard as a Queenslander, and I know it sounds sort of counterintuitive because at a state level, state of origin level, we've been so dominant. But I think pushing kids into the NRL, it can be done a lot more effectively, but it's so hard when we've got the concentration of just, pretty much anyone north of, say, Gladstone is a Cowboy, anyone south is with Brisbane, and realistically, I suppose the Titans are trying to get who they can, but they're looking and the northern rivers of New South Wales, Tweed Heads and the like. So, those catchment areas are quite interesting in comparison to the volume that's being able to dilute through those New South Wales systems. So as far as the next crop come through, it's going to be interesting to see how many you can keep coming through Cowboys, Brisbane and the Gold Coast Titans, and that's assuming that the Titans even stay in Queensland over the next couple of years. We're obviously still yet to find that out, and hopefully we'll have an answer before 2018 season kicks off. Anyway, all little things aside, so that's my 5-minute little rant on that, and my feelings around the position of the game. I still feel, I know in mass we can't expect these crazy multi-million, $100 million contracts, because we simply don't have the viewership, the populations that you see in the Northern Hemisphere for sports like, basketball, baseball, soccer, American football. It's always going to outclass us, but I think in a growing population down here in Australia, it does give hope that, hey, it might be another 50 years, and we can see some multi-million dollars for single year contracts. So we can only hope that the game's around for that extended period of time, and it does continue to thrive and build on a world stage. I'd love to see the game get to a point where it's more than a 3-horse race, essentially. I know we're starting to see some of the Pacific Island nations as individual countries start to loom as competitive counterparts, particularly nations like Tonga and PNG. It's great to see, but I would love to see it even more fiercely competitive and expand the World Cup to where we need more positions to fill. So yeah, it's exciting time, I think, especially now that we are so connected across the digital platforms, and I think over the next 4 years before the next World Cup, we're going to see that expand even more. Anyway, moving into the second week of the Rugby League World Cup, we see the Kangaroos take on the French tonight in Canberra. I'll flick it over so we can have a look at these team lists. So yeah, a fair few changes for the French. The centres have changed, but the most notable is this change in the halves here. Forgive me for my pronunciation of these French surnames. It's going to be very Australianised. So Theo Farget, I'm going to assume that it's Farget. I like the sound of Farget if it's not anyway. He moves to 7 after playing 6. And yeah, we see up the top here, so Will Bartho, he's the half for the London Broncos, so he carries a fair bit of experience and was their goal kicker during week 1. So if things weren't already, bad enough to kick off their campaign with an unexpected loss to Lebanon, it now gets even tougher when you've got to come up against the defending World Cup champions. So yeah, a change there for the French. The number 6 in Margenet plays for the Sheffield Eagles, so that's the Championship 1 team. So I believe they're just outside. I believe they're the Championship 1 team, which is basically second tier, so like the equivalent of our Queensland Cup and New South Wales Cup. So not terribly inexperienced, but at the same time not playing with the frivolity of the week in week out nature of the speed of Super League over in England. So they're the main changes for the French side. We scroll down to the Aussies, and the most notable changes are on our edges. So Tom Trbojevic and Josh Mansour come into the side for Val Holmes and Dane Gagai. And the change in the halves, we see Cooper Cronk getting rested for James Maloney. So an interesting halves combination in Michael Morgan and James Maloney. I'm not sure how they will complement each other. It wouldn't surprise me if James Maloney really tries to dominate his role in the halves to see if he can, win Mal Meninga over and snare the number 6 jumper for when Cooper Cronk does return in the coming weeks. But it's good to see that Michael Morgan has been given the show of faith from Mal Meninga to have another crack at that 6 jersey. I think, playing a lesser known nation, at least in recent times in the French, it'll be a lot more opportunistic for him to, just knuckle down on the fundamentals, sort out that short kicking game, make sure that he's taking the ball to the line and putting players in the correct holes, passing the ball to the correct runners through, whether it's your short balls, lead lines, all that sort of jazz. But I think the positions that I'm most keen to get a hold of tonight is the number 10 and the number 15. So my boy Regan Campbell-Gillard from the Penrith Panthers gets a start. His first ever test and he's starting. I fucking love that. I think he's going to go absolutely fucking bananas. I hope he wipes some of these French frogs out. Felice Kafusi, absolutely damaging on the right edge for the Melbourne Storm in their premiership campaign this year. So look to him to get plenty of game time, I would suspect. Not unexpectedly, Josh Maguire regained the 13 jersey after Jake Trbojevic tore his pec. Seeing Tommy Turbo on that wing, he'll obviously get his opportunity here for the Kangaroos, but whether or not he'll get a start now, I really feel like having Jake in the team really would have done his chances a heck of a lot of good if his brother was around, just simply because of that partnership that they have at club level. I very much believe that Mal Meninga would give Tom a bit of a license to rogue around that ruck and see where he can pop up in support, particularly in the first couple of plays coming out of trouble. If they're in that sort of midfield, catching some lazy defenders in that 25 to 35 minute mark leading up to half time. I really would have loved to have seen that at a test level. And so it's a shame that won't occur. But I think where we make up for that as far as strength of combination goes is with James Maloney and Wade Graham. We've seen it time and time again how well they've linked it at club level after winning the 2016 premiership for Cronulla. And I alluded to that in the review last week, that I felt that Wade Graham wasn't utilised to the best of his abilities. I thought they sort of took him away from his mainstay. And I know to a certain degree, you need to stick to a structure where you can't just try and force everyone's individual brilliance into this one, I guess, crackpot of talent. But at the same time, I think when you've got little pieces of the puzzle from each respective clubs, especially at the NRL level, you want to try and leverage those at any opportunity that you can. It's no secret as to why you've got the spine of Slater, Cronk and Smith. We see those kicks in and around the ruck for, Cam Smith kicking back across the ruck for Billy Slater and even Cooper Cronk at times. So, excuse me, they're the little combinations that you're looking for. So I hope that Maloney and Wade Graham do get a chance to execute on some of those. Some other news that's been pretty big for the Aussie camp. Josh Mansour welcomed another baby into the family, and Ben Hunt is getting married today. So that's, it's not smooth sailing as far as training camps go. But off the back of that, and I actually sort of predicted this before I found out that Mansour had his kid, I think we can pencil Josh Mansour in for a double during this game. So I was sort of trying to piece out where I can find some value for each game. And for Josh Mansour to nab a double, that's paying $2.30. So for those punters out there that are looking for some value, that's one that I've found. And as far as the line goes, the line is currently sitting at 56.5 start for Australia. So I'm actually going to peel that back a little bit. So the French plus 50.5 is $2.40. So I think there's a little bit of value there. You just don't know if the Aussies take the foot off the gas late in the game. But who knows, if you're looking for some even money, that $1.90 line is sitting at 56.5. Otherwise, I like the French at 50.5 at $2.40. Chuck that in a multi with Mansour, and you've got yourself $5 plus. So for a game where you can't get any money for Australia head to head, I think that's pretty handy. Alrighty guys, moving forward into the second game, the Kiwis versus Scotland. Some interesting changes, and it changes for the Kiwi team that I'm excited about. The biggest change that I'm happy to see here, and again, it's opportunistic versus the opposition that they have at their disposal, and that is Tamari Martin coming in at 5'8" for Cody Nikorima. I'm guessing that this is the coin toss. The coin toss. I'll try that again. For the New Zealand side to basically see who's going to partner Sean Johnson for the rest of this campaign. Now, Cody Nigarima got off to a very, very good start. So the ball is in Martin's court now. We've seen after the experience that he's gained coming to the Cowboys mid-season from Penrith, gets a grand final berth, although, obviously a disappointing result. That experience is something that you can never take away from Tamare. And, they're not too dissimilar, him and Nigarima. Obviously, Nikarima's probably got a bit bigger physique as far as his build goes, but they've both got very, very good footwork. And I'll really like to see how they incorporate Martin's short kicking game, taking that ball to the line as far as trying to link up with the likes of RTS out the back. Areas where I'm a little bit questioning the starting side is Elijah Taylor at 9. So he's come in for Thomas Lulawai, and poor old Danny Levi's been left on the bench yet again. I mean, that's just what the side's been named at. It doesn't mean that Danny Levi won't get a start late. We've seen Warrior Hargraves there did get a start after initially being named 18th man. And then your back rowers are Kenny Bromwich and Joe Tarpanay. So I really like that back row. So we see Mannering gets a rest from this match, and Adam Blair will continue to play at lock. So we've seen the unbirthing of some future Kiwi stars in Asafa Solomona and Danny Levi, as well as Brad Takarangi scoring on debut as well. So they're definitely building something here, the Kiwis. And after a bit of a slow start against Samoa, it was 10-4 at half time before really going on with the job and winning by 30 points. They'll really be looking to run the scoreboard up on this one, and I think they will. There hasn't been too many changes for Scotland. The winger Oakes, a young 18-year-old from the Hull Kingston Rovers, gets replaced by Russell, who plays for the Warrington Wolves currently in the Super League. But yeah, for the Scottish, if they're going to be any chop, it's up to these halves here in Danny Brough and Oscar Thomas. Thomas, I believe, spent some time with the Bradford Bulls in the Super League. So both guys with plenty of experience, but we seen firsthand last week that meant next to nothing against Tonga. And if we're starting to weigh up Tonga and New Zealand as far as how they're comparing, it's an opportunity now for the Kiwis to also try and notch up that 50 plus points. Dean Farr and Peter Hiku coming into the side bring a wealth of experience. It's a pretty scary thought that they weren't around week 1, and that's your substitute outside backs coming in for Wateen Zalesniak and Jordan Rapana. So to have those guys at your disposal straight off the bat, it's something that's very, very scary. So New Zealand to win by more than 50.5 is $2.46, and I think that's juice as well. So yeah, I think as long as these forwards for New Zealand just lay that platform early, I think even if it takes them a little while to get into the game, which I don't think it will, I think having these young guys in Bromwich and Tarpanay on an edge, that's where you're going to get a lot of these second-tier nations struggling, is that defence around your back row, half and centre. If you get any sort of confusion or even just one-on-ones with the inexperience of these guys and the size of some of these island nations, you even create those one-on-one opportunities, you're going to come off on top more often than not. And the fact, you look at that bench, Asafa Solomona, Russell Packer, Adam Fanua-Blake gets his opportunity after a great season for the Manly Sea Eagles, and Danny Levi. But yeah, those three big bodies coming off the bench, Asafa Solomona, Packer and Fanua-Blake, off the back of Tapau and Ria Hargraves starting the match. Good fucking luck, Scotland. I really can't see you reeling the Kiwis in by less than 50, unfortunately. So a big win for the Kiwis, and games that I think both Australia and New Zealand will be looking to see who they're going to put their trust in moving forward in this World Cup campaign. Next up, my opinion, this will be the best game of the round, just because there's so much, I guess, national pride on the line. Tonga versus Samoa, and it's good to see that they're playing it over in New Zealand, so it's going to be played in Waikato, so a lot more of those locals can get to New Zealand. No doubt a lot of them will already be living in New Zealand, have heritage back to Tonga and Samoa, even if they are living in New Zealand. We see a couple of changes, ones that I thought, or at least one that I thought should have even been in place last week, and perhaps it was because they were playing a little bit of a lower opposition, and that's David Fusatua in for the legend Manu Vatavai. Solomon Akata also comes in for Conrad Hurrell. So yeah, you look at that back line, 1 to 5, Hopewade, Tupou, Jennings, Carter, Fusatua, like all guys that had phenomenal seasons for their clubs in 2017, and particularly Tupou and Jennings last week. Even as I mentioned, Hopewade in his ability to just help support Tui Lolohea and Adahingano in the halves. I think if he can play that same role, that's really going to be where the difference lies. Lolahea's been around for a little while now. Adahingano is new to the NRL scene, getting a few caps, playing in multiple positions for the Warriors. I guess to a certain degree, we scroll down to the Samoan side, and they stick with the same halves from last week, and Joseph Paulo and Ben Roberts. Again, yes, there's experience, but there comes a difference between experience and your ability to execute on a high level. And I think even with the inexperience of Tui Lolohea and Adahingano, having that big win last week and playing with the forwards that they now have in the side in Jason Taumalolo and Andrew Fafita, and the experience and absolute devastating skill at times of a Will Hopewade, I think that's going to help elevate their game, as opposed to, Joseph Paulo and Ben Roberts. I don't think you can really milk much more out of those guys. They're just experienced players that they're putting there. Joseph Paulo plays outside of the 6th position as well. We know he can play in the forward pack. So I'm really, really surprised that Moo Brown has only managed to sneak into the side off the bench. Don't be surprised if that does change, or if at some point during the game he's almost a backup, and if Jazz Vega can maintain his gas, that perhaps Joseph Paulo may even have a stint in the forwards, and Moo Brown could sneak into the halves. So it'd be interesting to see how they utilise him. And in the forward pack, good to see that Herman Sasa gets a start in the front row after coming off the bench last week. And then also we see there Matangi has been removed, and Zane Musgrove from the Rabbitohs comes onto the bench as well. So yeah, they're the two changes, and Sasa comes into the starting side with Lasone going back to the bench. The other change is Ricky Latelli comes onto the wing. Now, I sort of question that move. I don't think he's an out-and-out winger. I like his size and his ability to get outside his opposite number in the centres. I think he's got that little bit of late footwork. He can get that palm and an offload. He positions his winger quite well. We've seen numerous times for the Cronulla Sharks. And in their squad, they've got Matt Wright, who's not playing. I would have thought if you were looking for a genuine winger, someone who is apt at finishing, Matt Wright would have been that right selection. He played really, really well given his opportunities after injuries at Manly this year, and he's a goal kicker. If you're going to make this game a sloppy affair, you're trying to make it a war, something that's going to go down to the wire, you want someone that can sort of kick you home. So that's a skill that I think a lot of times, especially in these sort of tournaments where you only get one crack, they're extremely important. So I was quite surprised that they ended up picking. Don't get me wrong, I want Ricky Latelli in the team. I'd probably have him in there over Tim Laffey, to be perfectly honest. I know Laffey had a good start for the Dragons, but I thought it was evident that he was really playing off the confidence from the Dragons forward pack that were getting them momentum in those first, third of the season. And then he really shied away and didn't really offer much for Mary McGregor after that. Other areas where I think Tonga can really start to dominate is in their kicking game. Young Tonamapea at the back, I don't think he's a genuine fullback, and I think if they bomb the fuck out of him, they can really get some strong results. So I really hope to see that kicking game come out, even if it is, Will Hopewade that does take charge of that. I think Adahingano has a good short kicking game. I think Lolohea is still yet to really prove himself in that area of his game. But I'm really looking forward to seeing with what sort of passion is overcome in this game, and who rises to the occasion. Undoubtedly, that forward pack, as we said before, with Fafita and Jason Taumalolo, but another interesting matchup will be the experienced Sikamanu up against the bull in Josh Papali. So old versus young, but you'd have to argue that Papali's got the greater experience, having played for Australia at times and in the Queensland dynasty. So yeah, it's interesting across the board. There's plenty of NRL experience, and like I said, those island nations are really starting to step up to the plate and establish their own. But I think for me, just that the few pluses in the Tongan boxes, I think that youth and exuberance can overcome the experience in the halves of Tonga versus the Samoan halves. And that devastating left edge of Tupou and Jennings, I think they've just got to get their opportunities at certain times and really can make them pay. And then if Fafita and Taumalolo can find another gear, I don't think it really matters if they're playing Wales or they're playing Australia. Given their chances, I think they're going to make any team pay in this World Cup. So for me, I like Tonga at 14.5 is $2.14. That's about the best value that I could find in line betting. And I think, if you can more than double your money on the Tongan side of this skill set, that's a pretty good return. Alrighty, into the next game. England and Lebanon. So obviously some big changes. So Sam Burgess is out. He may return towards the end of this tournament with that MCL injury. And the other big news is Lebanon winning their first ever World Cup game, which they weren't expected to do. So we see Burgess come out. Ben Curry comes off the bench and he'll play in the back row with Alex Walmsley coming into the side. Walmsley is a St. Helens player from the English Super League. So again, they're still filling those ranks with experienced players. I think Wayne Bennett has done an amicable job in putting together this English outfit. And if there's an area where you really want to stand up to this Lebanese side, having a look at them across the board, they're quite a big team. It's that forward pack, and England have the experience and they also have the size. So we mentioned last week the experience, NRL experience that they have in this English forward pack with the likes of Hodgson, Graham and Whitehead, as well as Hyington and Burgess coming off the bench. So that's going to put them in good stead. But I think, the game-changing ability that Sam Burgess has will fill Lebanon with confidence. But at the same time, Wayne Bennett did make the point that I think Burgess went off after about 20-odd minutes, so they still didn't play disgusting against the Kangaroos. I think the game overall was a below-par quality game for those two nations, but it's not like as soon as Burgess went off, they dramatically lost their way. And I think that comes down to the experience of those English players that have played in the NRL, in Hodgson, Graham, Whitehead, etc. So, I don't think England will take these guys lightly. You've got the Lebanese side with the likes. If we scroll down here, we've seen Mitchell Moses, Robbie Farah, and Michael Leisha were probably the standout guys. Probably more so the combination that Moses and Leisha struck up around the ruck so quickly. Areas where I feel they need to improve. They've made a few changes in their back line. Their fullback, Daniel Abu-Sleeman. I forgot here. Sleeman, he played some lower grade footy down south. So, it doesn't come with, a crazy amount of experience. Certainly hasn't as an experienced NRL, but knows how to get around the park. And from watching their game on the weekend, that was probably an area, the fullback position was an area where they sort of lacked a little bit in their attacking raids. They were just that step behind, where you really want that fullback pushing through the line and giving, your outside backs, so your centers and wingers, time to play off the back of that. I just felt they were that 2 or 3 steps behind, which really halted some of the momentum and the stripping of numbers that I guess Robbie Farah and Mitchell Moses create just off their sheer pace and experience in the game. So I'd really like to see them change all of that. Big bodies up front, Tim Manor and Alex Twal, they're going to have to rip in and probably play some minutes that they're not used to playing, particularly Tim Manor. You know, he's not getting any younger, but I think that win in week one will definitely fill him with high spirits of performing well. And I think that's ultimately what Brad Fittler will be looking out of this Lebanese side is a really strong, exuberant performance, being able to stand up to a nation that, you know, a lot of people won't really be giving them a chance of coming close to. I think where the English will sort of do Lebanon in over the course of a longer period of time across that 80 minutes is that ruck speed. The Super League, we know, isn't governed so much by slowing down the ruck. The ruck speeds, the balls are a lot faster. And that's not really going to be an issue for any of these NRL players to sort of pick up to, simply because a lot of them have played previously in the Super League before coming down to Australia to play in the NRL. And when you've got someone as damaging as Josh Hodgson playing in that dummy half role, Lebanon is going to get found out at some point. You're not going to get 80 minutes out of the experience of Tim Manor. You're not going to get 80 minutes out of the exuberant newcomer in Alex Twal. So I get that ruck speed is definitely going to be an area where the English can take advantage, and I think where they'll get most of their points. We've also seen Luke Gale at half. He goes off like a frog in a sock, and we know the off-the-mark speed of Gareth Widdop as well. So don't be surprised if the 6 and 7 both cross the stripe. Unforced errors for Lebanon and the English too. They both come up with 11 errors in their first game, so both coaches will be looking to tidy that stat up a little bit. But especially coming out of trouble, Lebanon can't afford to turn over cheap football and give any easy position to the English, because defending their errors, defending penalties, etc., I think is going to be an area that they need to steer clear of. Anytime you're giving a team with this much experience multiple opportunities set after set to accumulate momentum, you're going to be in for a long day. So I think, as much as I would like to say Lebanon will go with the English, I think it may only be for the first 20 possibly. I really think the back end of each halves, you're going to see the class and experience of the English open up. If by some chance, you know, it is an experienced spine with Lebanon, they can capitalise on every opportunity that those three guys in Farah, Moses and Leisha do create. If they can capitalise, I think they can get the English peeping over their shoulder. But just from those reasons that I gave earlier around the ruck speed, unforced errors, I think they're really going to start to accumulate, and that'll be the undoing of the Lebanese side. So I think I'm looking at England to cover the 20-point start. Italy, USA. Well, the Italians really probably I guess the disappointment of week one, especially with their littering of NRL experience. We see it there in Tedesco, Paul Vaughan, Alvaro and Brown. You know, so some other guys in Reith Muller and Minicello's played a shit ton of NRL. I shouldn't negate his contribution. But I think now where we're going to see a bit more stability come into the Italian side is the re-emergence of Terry Campese. So he'll be back on board this week. We've seen Ryan Getty come into the number 7 position as opposed to 9 from last week, and Joe Tramontana comes off the bench to start at 9. And let me just check my notes who fell out of place there. You have to forgive me. I'm not sure who the expense was for Centrone. Oh, sorry, Centrone comes into the side. So he's a youngster from the Wyong Roos. He's a centre winger. So I was a bit perplexed as to why you would carry a centre winger on the bench, unless outside of that he's played some sort of position in lower grades that I'm unaware of. But from the research that I've done, Centrone is a centre winger at Wyong. So it'd be interesting to see how they look to utilise him. But otherwise, yeah, that reshuffle around the halves, I think Campese and Getty, who's an experienced campaigner, up in North Queensland at a Queensland Cup level. I think that will help steady the ship very much so. And the likelihood of Nathan Brown putting together 2 poor performances after the season he's had, I think is very unlikely, especially against America. It's no secret that the USA and Wales are probably the 2 most genuine semi-professional outfits in this World Cup campaign. We have a look down at the American side. Areas where I think they're really going to have to work overtime is on their edges. So Danny Howard and Matt Shipway, they're going to have to double down on their defensive efforts. So those boys, you know, they come from genuine sort of reserve grade backgrounds. Shipway from South Newcastle and Howard from the Mounties in the Ron Massey Cup. I think when you're coming up against other forward packs that can create edge opportunities, particularly, you know, even just from the experience of Reith Muller and Minicello, they're going to have their work cut out for them. Throw Nathan Brown around wherever you want, and the opportunities that you know that Campese, even though he's an elder statesman now, he's going to make sure he helps his NRL experienced players come up with. And I think having Campese back in there, it's just going to bring the flair of James Tedesco out, and no doubt he'll be looking to put the events of the week just gone. If you haven't heard, apparently Tedesco was getting a little bit too friendly with one of his teammates' girlfriends, and one of his teammates let him know all about it and swiftly punched him in the fucking face. So it'll be interesting to see if Teddy's sporting any injuries from his night out. But yeah, outside of that, Terry Campese, James Tedesco, I think they'll start to form that little partnership, and I'd really look to encourage, you know, Paul Vaughan and Alvaro to let those offloads go, and the more touches Tedesco can get that aren't just fucking bringing the ball back out from his own end is going to serve Italy the best. So yeah, I don't really have too much more outside of that. I really doubt that we're going to see a poor performance from Italy again. I think it's sort of the wake-up call that they needed. So that was the change. So the half in Jack Johns was dropped. So Getty was there, and then Tramontana came off the bench, and then Chris Centrone comes into the side. So that was the little change up there that sort of gobsmacked me before. So yeah, Italy for me, I think 20 plus margin is what I expect looking at that team on paper. But again, as we found out time and time again, paper ain't worth shit. This should be an interesting game. So it's the only game of the week. PNG and Ireland are the only 2 teams that had wins in week 1 that are playing each other. So someone's going to be disappointed, and someone's going to go to 2-0. So someone's going to get off to a flyer in this second-tier nation campaign. So the only changes that we see for PNG after their 50-6 drubbing of the Welsh is the 9 from week 1 in Puara drops out of the 17 altogether, and they've just decided to go with Kurt Baptiste and James Seguiaro alternating there. So Baptiste gets the nod to start, Seguiaro off the bench, and I think that's a good move. I think Seguiaro is one of those players who is a genuine super sub. I think he comes off the bench with great enthusiasm and really lifts the energy, whereas, you know, Kurt Baptiste, he's never going to lead a team astray. He's never really set the world on fire at an NRL level, but he's been ultra consistent for the Canberra Raiders over a number of years now. So they're pretty much the only changes that we see. I was talking to a viewer of the show earlier in the week in the comments section, a Pommy fella, and he liked the odds of Ireland, but I'd have to say that my counter to that in the comments section was that PNG playing at home, you know, it's such a hard task. The fact that a lot of these guys that are in the national team played for the Hunters in the Queensland Cup, and now you're sprinkling in some NRL experience, and even the guys who haven't played NRL in you know, Luke Page, Reece Martin, they just bring so much energy and I guess just structure to the flamboyant nature of the PNG locals. So I think off the back of this World Cup campaign, we're going to see even more of these PNG hunters fall into NRL systems, and I think it's great for the game. If we can get to a stage again, like I was saying earlier, where we can get Tonga and PNG knocking off an England, New Zealand or Australia, what a state our game is in as far as strength is concerned. But yeah, alluding back to PNG, playing at home, you've got an Irish side that is actually made up predominantly of Irish descent, or at least European players. The only guys that have experienced any of the conditions down here is a centre in Michael Morgan, who's played plenty of lower grade footy in Australia. He's over with the London Broncos now, and their 5'8" Pewarangi came through the Knights NYC system there. So we see the 4 and the 6 for Ireland are the only ones who would even be close to this, but haven't been playing in these conditions for years as well. Pewarangi played a couple of years of rugby over in Ireland, so he's sort of accustomed, both of these guys are sort of accustomed themselves to that Northern European winter playing over there, so they're really going to feel the pinch. You can just see how much it hurt the Welsh last week playing in those conditions, not to mention you're playing in a stadium full of people who want you to fucking lose and want PNG to run the scoreboard up as much as possible. I've got no doubt after Ireland getting off to their winning campaign last week, that confidence I think is massive, and as I alluded to before, I think that's why Tonga will perform so well against Samoa, is just because of the confidence that they're bringing from that week 1 win. Confidence is everything in these short tournaments, but I don't think it'll be enough to spur the Irish to a win. I think the physicality across the park is going to shock them. And if I'm the Irish, I know a tactic a lot of the time when you're playing these island nations is to keep the ball in play, really turn the big forward packs around. But the PNG hunters, they're a bit of a different beast, you know. They're not necessarily big, tall, thick like our Pacific Islanders. They're all like the same size. They're all about 5'8" and built like brick shithouses. And that's a really tough thing because their centre of mass is so low. We've seen a couple of the Welsh blokes knocked the fuck out from getting their heads in the wrong position in trying to tackle these monsters. So for me, I'd actually be looking to try and defend these guys with as much structure as possible. So I'd be looking to get the ball out. Don't let the likes of David Mead get the ball in his hand, returning the football. Don't let Nene McDonald get his hand. Even like some of the returns from Olam and Gary Lowe in particular last week. So yeah, I'd really be looking to slow the game down, get the ball out, and that's the tactic I'd be taking against the Kumuls. Give your forward pack every opportunity it can to replenish it. Its energy stocks. We've seen now that in this World Cup that the interchange is increased to 10 as opposed to the NRL where we're used to 8. So you've even got those 2 extra changes to what we're used to here in Australia. So if you can leverage that to your advantage, keep the ball out of play, defend with structure, force some errors, which is, you know, we know that the Kumuls are going to come up with some unforced errors. They can get pretty sloppy in the play the ball. They can have a shit carry as far as ball positioning in the arm. So, you know, it's not to say that the Kumuls won't give the Irish their opportunities. It's the Irish's, I guess, execution that is going to be the big difference to whether this is a blowout. But just with some of that NRL experience in and around the ruck, we've seen how damaging David Mead was with his support play and just his read on the kicking game. And then the ability of some of the smaller men. We've seen at one time there that Baptiste, Seguiaro, and Puara were all on the field at the same time, as was Paul Ayton, and they absolutely ripped the Welsh team apart. A bit of a different scenario here with the Irish being a lot more well established than the Welsh, but I don't see the result being too different in my eyes. And the final game we have is Fiji up against the Welsh. To be honest, I think the Welsh and the USA are going to be our poorest performers. I can't see the Welsh winning a game, unfortunately. And when you're replacing PNG with Fiji, the only location change is from PNG to Townsville. So it's going to be humid as fuck, just like it was in week 1, which we know that the Welsh struggled with. You know, some of the guys that you had with Australian experience for the Welsh are gone. So Danny Ansell comes into the side with Matt Seamark from Winner Manly and Mid. So again, just makes the job a little bit harder again. Yeah, I don't really have too many comments about this game other than I think it's going to be an absolute drubbing by Fiji. In fact, I looked at some of the line betting. Fiji to cover 59.5 is paying $4.85. I think it's well within the realms of possibility, simply because you look at 1 to 6 for Fiji. Kevin Aguama, Suliasi Vunivalu, Tane Milne, Akili Uate, Marcelo Montoya, and Jared Hayne. You know, they're going to rack up some fucking points. And when you've got blokes like Ashton Sims, Api Coruscant, who you know is going to dance around that ruck and tear you to shreds, and Vunakeke gets his start now that Kane Evans is out with that nasty wrist break last week. Those guys that I said to keep an eye on last week performed. Kikau, yes, he came up with a few errors, but he more than made amends with a great try. Braden Williami, Tui Kamakamika, Jacob Saifidi, and Benny Knack coming off the bench. I just think there's too much size up front that's going to overpower, you know, the genuine reserve grade physiques of the Welsh, to be polite. And then you've got that damaging 1 to 6. I'd love to see Jared Hayne get the running boots on and really take the line on and challenge him. It's interesting, a lot of the time you see when Jared Hayne's in the headlines for the wrong reasons is majority of the time, probably not so much of recent, but he comes up with the goods when he's under adversity. And as far as a spectacle goes, I enjoy seeing Jared Hayne when Jared Hayne is at his best. So even though I don't really care to indulge him, you know, how he acts as a person and what we can expect of him around this Gold Coast Titans, I guess, backflip. It's sounding like he won't be at the Titans for 2018, even though he tried to snub that out on Twitter yesterday. Ended up in a bit of a Twitter war with yet another journo. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. But as far as sticking back to the footy, I can't see the Welsh putting up too much of a fight, just because their lack of experience. Them and the Americans, they're the two nations with the least amount of NRL experience, and we've seen, although outside of the case of the Italians, how much it does help put structure around those guys that are coming through and haven't played at that elite level. So look, that covers it for week 2. I'm very much looking forward to, again, as I said, the Tonga and Samoa game. I think if we really see Tonga clamp down and put a win together in similar fashion to what the New Zealanders did last week, they're very much going to firm alongside PNG if they can squash a confident Irish side. They're the two really dark horses of this competition. So I very much look forward to those two games and how PNG and Tonga perform. And yeah, that basically brings us to an end. I hope you've enjoyed everything for the week 2 preview of Footy Rants. Again, I'm Benny Matthews, and if you can like everything that I post out, share it with your mates, tag away if you agree with anything. If you disagree, if there's something that just even around the game in general at the moment, obviously it's a little bit busy. You know, we've seen things that the whole Moylan and Maloney trade with Penrith and Sharks is coming up again. If you want me to sort of analyse or give my thoughts around any of the areas of the NRL leading into the 2018 season, please just hit me up and I'll talk for hours on anything rugby league. It's my passion. So thank you very much for tuning in, and you will see me at the start of next week where we will break down and see how right or wrong I was across the board. Righto gang, have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week.